The County of El Paso Public Works Department is offering sandbags at no cost or requirements to the public. The sandbags are outside of the facilities and are available 24 hours a day. The location of the county facilities are the following: the Road and Bridge Fabens Warehouse, located at 1331 North Fabens Street in Fabens, Texas, 79838. The Road and Bridge Canutillo Warehouse, located at 191 Canutillo Avenue in Canutillo, Texas, 79835. And the Road and Bridge Montana Warehouse, located at 14698 Van Lane, El Paso, Texas, 79938.
Commissioner Andrew Haggerty would like to invite you to his weekly breakfast meeting that takes place every Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. at Danny's Diner, located at 4690 Trans Mountain Road. Every week he has a different speaker who will be discussing topics of interest for the community. So if you live in the Northeast, West Side, or anywhere else in the county, come and join us for the breakfast meeting.
Don't wait in line, pay online. Visit the Financial Recovery Division website at http://www.epcounty.com/budget/financialrecovery.htm to make your payments online or find out more about our kiosk locations. We now accept payments on misdemeanor, felony, and justice of the peace cases.
You can now watch Commissioners Court meetings on YouTube. Go to youtube.com and search for El Paso County Commissioners or El Paso County, Texas. Subscribe to our channels to see our latest videos.
Did you know that you can save money on the cost of your medications? And doing so is easy. In 2015, the County of El Paso launched a prescription discount card program from coast to coast. The cards are available to all El Paso County residents free of charge and everyone qualifies. You can pick up a card at any county office location, Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, or Target pharmacies, or simply print the card at www.coastrx.com. Happy savings!
Did you know the County of El Paso's Purchasing Department is responsible for ensuring that all items and services needed by various county departments are purchased in the manner required by the state of Texas? Whether through formal sealed bids or smaller dollar quotations, the county purchasing team is dedicated to finding the best contracting return on your taxpayer dollars. Additionally, the Purchasing Department is responsible for the tracking of inventory within the county and properly disposing surplus through public auctions. For questions about how to become a vendor and compete for county contracts, or to learn more about public auctions, please contact us at telephone number 915-546-2048.
The 346 District Court Judge Angie Juarez Barriz started the El Paso Veterans Treatment Court program in 2012 for veterans and active service members that have been arrested and charged with a felony or misdemeanor criminal offense. To be considered for the specialty court, the statutory criteria includes be a veteran or current member of the United States Armed Forces, including a member of the Reserves, National Guard, or State Guard, and suffer from a brain injury, mental illness, or mental disorder, including PTSD, or be a victim of military sexual trauma, all occurring or resulting from military service. Call Sylvia Serna, Veterans Program Director, at 915-546-2119, or email her at sserna@epcounty.com for any information.
Did you know that the County of El Paso's fixed asset control and inventory disposal is handled through the purchasing department? Throughout the course of each business year, the county holds live public auctions to dispose of aged equipment, vehicles, furniture, and other items that are no longer needed. To find out about upcoming auctions or to learn more about the county's inventory disposal process, contact the purchasing department at telephone number 915-546-2048.
fried, although it still has.
It's not sushi if it's fried.
We digress.
That was a little hostile. A little hostile humor we just created.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, August 15th, 2018. Commissioners Court is meeting in special open session. Item number 2, discuss and take appropriate action on the fiscal year 2018-2019 budget for the County of El Paso, Texas.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, Judge, Commissioners. Today we're going to go over the budget register updated as of yesterday. We're also going to go over the revenue and expense fund balance history as far as the impact of the tax rate on that. And then tomorrow, that will probably be the majority of what we cover today, but tomorrow we will go back through the $1.5 million reduction, or the reduction to $1.5 million for personnel request. HR is working with departments on that since yesterday. And then we will also hear from Emergence Health Network tomorrow. They'll have one person here in person and one person will attend either via Skype or teleconference to give us an update on what their request is. And with that, I'll turn it over and we will go through a recap of the budget register.
Any questions that carried over from yesterday before I recap the budget register? Hearing none, I'll hop into the register. Ms. Keller sent that register to you this morning. So revised budget through yesterday's hearing, $345.12 million, $17.5 million over last year, or 5.34%. Comparatively, if you want to compare that to the change in FY17 to FY18, we grew by 3.9%, $12.6 million. What's driving the larger portion of this year's change is a significant investment in our strategic plan. Revised revenue estimates received from Mr. Dion this weekend, $276.6 million. That's $13.9 million over last year. The majority of that change in the revenue estimates has to do with our new revised property values, changes in sales tax, moving up the federal prisoner income, and then the rest of the charges for services, interest, etc. Budget currently would require $68.4 million to balance the budget. We take the $30 million out of that calculation because we set that up as an emergency fund. So to look at the operating budget, at least $34.5 million. That is $3.5 million more than last year's designation. Last year we designated 34.9. This year would be 38.4. Fund balance estimate yesterday, we split the difference at $80.25 million. When you see my projections as we move into that, I have a different number in there for fund balance, and I'll talk about that based off of the files I've received from Mr. Dion's office. It's a little bit higher on the projection because it's all, we will run expenditures through Thanksgiving. Materially speaking, there'll be a few stragglers after Thanksgiving that we're required to book and accrue those revenues and expenses, but all things being said, based on the expenditure projections and the revenue projections, it could come in as high as about $82 million on the fund balance, which is very close to last year's fund balance. That would leave approximately $41.7 million undesignated, or 13.25%. The two items that Ms. Keller mentioned, I updated the amount. If we were to go as low as 12.5, we've got about a $2.1 million swing there between what's in the budget now and what would bring it down to 12.5. These items here, the 1.5 for staffing and the 444 for EHN, are tentatively in this $345 million number. But as Ms. Keller mentioned, those are in for discussion tomorrow.
Okay. I thought we weren't going to.
Yeah. Yesterday the majority discussion was to include those.
So those do not impact the 2.1?
Those do not impact the 2.1. Because those are in, that brings that 2.1's already been impacted. So adding these does not change that 2.1. They're already in this number because we received a majority
But taking them out increases.
Taking them out increases that or increases fund balance. So this is the proof on the bottom. The other thing that is still on the discussion is if we were to maintain the current tax rate, that additional income from maintaining the tax rate is just a little over $2 million, $2,007,700. That is the register. Any questions on the register? All right.
Commissioner Bettis, did you want a real quick? Okay.
So the scenarios, got 3 scenarios out there, revised them last night for today. Those scenarios are as follows. Using a 5-year historical average, this number right here, revenue, the $270.6 million, how it ties to Mr. Dion's current revenue estimates we received for fiscal year 18. The line below there shows you the amount change, the line under that shows the percentage change, and the last line in the revenues is just the straight reduction of 1 year over the last. So you see this one at 2.6, 2.1, it changed by 0.5%. Expenditures right now, are in at $271 million. I pulled those off of Mr. Dion's expense projections, which tied the fund balance. So right now, if this is a rounded number, the rounded number for fund balance, taking, this number right here, 82.6, taking the projected year-end revenues, projected year-end expenses, factoring in last year's fund balance, all it does is take last year's fund balance, adds revenue, subtracts projected expenses, and it looks like we're going to have a smaller erosion of fund balance than originally anticipated based off of the current revenue and estimate miles I received from Mr. Dion this weekend.
And that's based on an aggregate perspective.
Sure.
And the revenue projections and expenses that I did are at the line item now.
Right.
By department, so hopefully it's more accurate, but you're right, it's a range.
So it could come in as high as 82.6. And then thereafter, factoring in, so this number here of 283 looks at what the revenue estimates are for next year, but also takes into account what's been the typical variance. This year, for example, we had a revenue estimate of $262 million. Well, right now, our actuals are looking, or our estimate are looking about 270. So it looks like we're going to have about $8 million over the projection. So looking at periods going into the future, we take that variance of budget versus actual into account, and then look at the prior year 5-year history and smooth that trend forward. If there's any one-time revenues in there, I back them out. If there are any one-time expenditures as well, we back those out of the model as well. So going forward into next year, that average growth here for FY19 is anticipated to be about 4.4% on average. But I also have to look at what have we added to the budget so far. When I look at that $13 million in strategic investment, about $1.5 million of that is one time. So going forward, I've got to put an educated guesstimate on with new appropriations coming in. Where's that going to play out? So I'm looking at with what we've added to the budget, my estimate is probably about $9.5 million of that will come to fruition. Of that $9.5 million of new expenses above and beyond the normal percentage, how much of that is one time? And right now I've got an estimate in there about $1.5 million with the studies that are in as part of that $13 million would hit in 19, but I'm backing out of FY20 because those are one-time expenses for FY19. So as you look at the model and run the model out, again, using that 5-year percentage change. Now that percentage change also takes into account, if you look at the last 5 years, in 3 out of the 5, we gave steps and COLAs. In 2 out of the 5, we just gave salary adjustments, but they were as high as 4%. So I've got to look at how's that running average of 4%, 4.5%, 3% affecting us into the future. Right now in the model, we're planning on giving the possibility of step. Not everyone's eligible for a step, but 60 some odd percent, I think it's a little over 60 some odd percent of employees are, as we've had turnover. And if we're going to give a 1.5% cost of living increase. So looking at what that impact is just in salaries alone, which makes up about 77, 78% of our average day-to-day spend. that 4.5% change in salary works into this model because on average, our expenditures grow by 4.4%. So,
But all of the past years do.
Exactly.
Right?
So what I'm saying is, looking at that history takes into account that we have grown our base expenses by steps and COLAs in 3 out of 5 years, both full step and full COLA. Next year's model and thereafter takes those averages into account. So right now, if you had seen, if you looked at the model we had the other day, this number was about a -12. Right now, in 2023, it dropped by about $6 million.
And that's with no change to revenue.
Correct. That is
Like
the
no-
effective tax rate. This is just
That's
putting it on.
at the effective with no reduction in
Expenses
Expenses.
and no
Current-
change
yeah,
in revenue.
current, yeah. So this is just a graphical representation of the model. We still have that alligator gap, and I call it the alligator gap because the jaws are open and we're gonna, potentially consume some reserves. This is the same basis. The only thing we're doing here is maintaining the current tax rate. The 45.2694 is a little over, right around half a penny higher. That half a penny, every penny generates 4.1, so that's $2,007,700 more. It adds to the revenue model, changes the percentages by about 0.1% on revenue running forward. So that runs the projection out to 2023 of revenues and expenses. The expense model doesn't change because the expense model is based off the same expenditure trends and budget we have in place now. But it changes that from a $6 million potential consumption down here in 2023 to a positive $10.8 million. So we have about a $16 million cumulative swing on that. That's the graphical representation. Closes that gap a little bit, takes that potential fund balance above the zero line, has it at 11 out here. This is where we see some of the big consumption years coming in. Right now, FY19 is estimated in the area of $76 million, but it's all subjective. We've got some pretty significant appropriations out there. We've got $7 million or $7.25 million budgeted for a flood control to the extent that we are very aggressive and spend every penny of it. That will affect this model. So if we spend all $13 million that we appropriate as new things for strategic planning, this model will change into future years. This is something I want to update on a very regular basis, and I think would be a good exercise to update at least midway through the year. The first quarter makes it kind of tough because the first quarter we haven't had our material revenues flow in. By quarter number 2, then we've got a regular flow of revenues. Our property taxes are significantly in, or they're in the low 90 percentile, probably 92 or 93% collections by Q2. But I think this would be a good update for us to look at the end of the close of the second quarter in April. We're running these projections well ahead of starting our budget hearing, and I think we should stay attuned and looking at this early on.
Wally, that's a very telling graph. But on the flood control, that graph does not display the money. The money is that we've set aside. You're estimating that we will not spend it.
Well, I'm estimating of $13 million we've changed for strategic planning. We're going to spend $9.5 million of that 13.
Okay, that's what
I'm
projecting.
factoring that in.
Okay.
So, and I've got to take at least, it's not all the way aggressive, but it's a pretty solid stance at moving that number forward. I'm looking at 9.5, 1.5 being one time, and 8 million being things that we would spend on an ongoing basis. And this model takes that ongoing spend into consideration. The last scenario is looking at what potentially would impact us in the future, and that is if in 19, the model in 19 will look the same, but if in 20 we looked at the addition of an additional penny, is where do we start sort of smoothing out that consumption of the reserves and bringing the revenue and expense into alignment? And you'll see a rather significant change on the end game. Right now it's about 36, so that addition in 20 of a penny starts smoothing out the consumption, but probably out here in 2022, that might be necessary again. Certainly by 2023 it would be, but 2023, as you look at our tax rate model, we have a big drop off in debt in 2023, but now we've got to look at aligning that availability for the consideration of a debt issuance and meeting our infrastructure needs, and balancing out those operational needs, but also that long-term capital construction needs, and keeping the infrastructure of the county in good shape and replaced on a regular basis. So that is. Oh, and then the last one is just showing how maintaining the tax rate, adding a penny in 2020, closes that gap rather significantly and gives us that strategic planning long-term to meet the needs of an ever-growing community, and also look at that 2023 and meeting our capital needs. Questions on the scenarios?
Judge, what is our the budget utilization for the year?
On salary and fringe, we're going to hit right at 94% this year. On the operating, because we had several large significant items in there, i.e. stormwater that we're reappropriating, we're probably going to come in closer to the 89 or 90%. From a budget perspective, it's about a 70-30 split on personnel and operating, but on a spend basis, our spend is typically about 78% personnel and 22% on operating.
In terms of just monetary numbers, though, how much is that?
On personnel?
On unspent?
Unspent total,
unspent.
Just for personnel and operating.
Budgeted that we're not going to spend dollar-wise.
On personnel, close to $12 million. On the operating, equally, probably close to about 12. I'll look at it a little closer, but probably pretty close to both.
24 million unspent?
Yeah.
Let me pull up my worksheet real fast.
You have it? Okay, great.
And that's not calculated into any of the numbers.
That's absolutely taken into consideration
with
the scenario. Yes, sir. Looking at what's appropriated versus
This
what's
is
actually
actual.
spent. This is actual historical and an estimate on future actuals, both revenue and expense. So
right.
as we close the books, unspent appropriations close out, and it becomes an actual versus actual. What's your unspent number in total then?
Okay, 1 second. I'm looking on just the departments where I actually projected. I'm not taking the contingencies into account. Let me take a look at that real quick. I'm just gonna take all the negatives out. I'm showing right now 9.8 on salary appropriations. But you have to look at the contingencies also, because
right, exactly.
I have about $2.5 million.
Yeah, we have about $1.5 million
worth of
contingencies
negatives where we're going to have to take out of reserve for salaries.
We've got almost $4 million to take back. We'll probably leave about $1.5 million ultimately by the end of the year unspent in what we were had budgeted for steps and COLAs. So it'll be closer to the $11.5, $12 million mark.
Appreciate the perspective. That is definitely helpful.
All right, so that's the overview of the scenario. We didn't have any departments on the list today. I did hear that there may be interest in reviewing and discussing this list one more time on the funding that's reserved.
Which topic in particular?
It was just in general.
It was also expressed to me that the court wasn't 100% certain on this yet. And so I don't know if you all want to give us direction that you're good to go with this one, or if you want any further modifications before we.
I just want to bring up something in danger of pushing your patience to the extreme. I just want to look at those $3 million again for the EIF. I like that. You know, and wondering if there's any possibility we can cut it down to 2.
And I think along the lines of that conversation, because Commissioner Stout brought it up yesterday, the Healthy Foods Initiative, I originally thought that perhaps it could be used through that fund. Commissioner Stout thinks that it's not one and the same, and so it would have to, I guess we'd have to make a decision as to whether or not it would be its own separate standalone on this list.
And I would tell you all, it depends, if you all direct us to make sure that we incorporate those types of initiatives in whatever policy we bring you on an economic impact fund, I mean, we'll do that. If you want to split it and have different policies addressing that, that's fine, but,
I mean, I just want it to be clear that the way that the HFFI works is not the same as like a typical impact payment or grant would work, right? I mean, if we're gonna make the decision to do HFFI, then we're gonna have to take $500,000 and give it to somebody. It's not like a company is gonna be coming and asking us for 500,000. Sorry, did I say million? I saw for sure no one's years ago. You know, I just wanted to be clear that, you know, that is a fund that I mean, the reason I wanted to separate it is because, you know, we're not going to have a company or a group or something like that coming and asking us for a disbursement or something like that. We take that money and we give it to a CDFI, and then they take it and they use it to leverage other funding. And so it doesn't stay in our pot the whole time. It is you know, it's taken out and so I mean, I want to make sure that that's something that's clear, you know. And that's why I wanted to separate it out, because it's a little bit different. But I mean, if we want to direct our economic development department to include an HFFI policy within our economic development policies, you know, I think that would be great. But, you know, for it to work, we need to have access to that $500,000 and actually send it to the CDFI so that they can start working it.
One of the things that it really bothered me last night is we're telling ourselves no on the 26 employees that's the bone number. I mean, that's the drop dead number that we must have. And we're telling ourselves, no, we can't afford that, so we're cutting that down. And this just, I think it's very forward-thinking, Commissioner Pettis. I think that's, sometimes you got to spend money to make money. But in this particular budget, my own opinion is just a little too high.
I mean, I think relative to our budget size and to, again, our community size, I think $3 million is relatively small. I think it's already been cut from the 10% sales tax that I would have liked to have seen. And then also considering Commissioner Stout's request, it's going to erode it even further. The reason I don't see this isn't really impacting, I think, our long-term forecasting. It's a modest expense, but I mean, honestly, I have more of an issue with the 1.5 COLA. You know, I think we should have gone closer to 1, and I think that, actually I have an issue with CPI. I was researching yesterday CPI, and I don't know why we use CPI. It's not directly reflective of the cost of living here in our community. If there's anything that I think we go and rehash, it's, trying to raise, cost of living 3% when I don't think that's reflective of what we haven't seen 3% inflation here in El Paso. And there's also general recognition that our salary schedules are 70%, or for elected officials, are 70% below market, which is reflective that we have a lower cost of living, but we don't take that into consideration for a cost of living increase. I think that we've, every time that we've pegged, the COLAs to a CPI figure, we're pegging that to a national figure that isn't reflective of the cost of living here in El Paso. And I think that's causing our budget to inflate more down the road, and I hate to be penny wise, pound foolish, in terms of getting rid of a relatively small economic development fund. That's not going to change our long-term outlook, and it's going to inhibit our ability, I think, to really make some economic traction in the future. I think we should look at perhaps reducing the COLAs a little bit further, and I'd be more comfortable with 1%. Even that, I don't have an accurate metric as to what is the proper cost of living for El Paso, but CPI is more of just a national indicator for the cost of goods, not necessarily how much cost of living in El Paso has gone up.
What's your estimation as far as the cost of living in El Paso?
There are other web I was looking at last night. There actually is a website that is available to communities that gives your community-specific cost of living relative to the U.S. average. It was a subscription service, so I didn't get a chance to do it last night, but that's something we could look at. But if we recognize that our cost of living is 70% below the national average, then we have to take that into consideration that we can't just take the national inflation rate and say that, well, then everything in El Paso is going up the same rate as the nation. If our cost of living is less, then the inflation rate is going to be less. I think coupled with the step and a 1% increase in COLA, we're at 3.5% increases, which I think is well above national inflation.
And George, are we talking about two separate issues then when we talk about the 3.0 and Commissioner Stout's 500,000? Are those two separate issues that we need to have consensus on, or is that one and the same?
Well, it depends. I think as Betsy mentioned, if we give direction to the economic development staff, if this $3 million in the EIF were to be approved, that a part of that be used for an HFFI, or we say that we're going to leave the $3 million intact and decide upon the 500,000 as a standalone. We could go either way.
And I think, Commissioner Leon, one thing I do think is important when we look at the Economic Impact Fund, it's similar to the item that I talked about. I know it's a very different amount, but the investment advisor of $50,000, that will pay for itself over time. And the concept under the Economic Impact Fund is it will generate future revenues, future sales tax, even future property growth. The more the higher people are paid, the more money going into our economy. The people buy upgrades to their homes, buy nicer homes.
No, I agree with you 100%. It was just the number that I was worried about, but I'll go along with the consensus of the court.
Commissioner, would it make you feel, I don't know how you feel about the HFFI fund, but would you feel better if the 500,000 was included in that, which drops it to the 2.5, of which 500 would go to this program? I don't know that I have a sense from where the court falls with the HFFI.
I don't agree with the HFFI. I don't think it's our role to tell people how to eat, when to eat, where to eat. We've already publicly attacked smoking, publicly attacked alcohol, now we're publicly attacking food. We are not the moral compass of El Paso County, and I don't see it personally. I mean, I haven't had the full presentation other than what was here that day. I don't see us giving $500,000 of tax money to somebody else and saying, do what you want with it. I don't think that's what we should do.
So, Commissioner, the point is for them to attract other grocers to these unserved communities?
So we have a huge problem in this community. It's called food insecurity.
Yeah.
Okay, a third of the children that live in this community are food insecure. So it's not about telling people what to eat. It's actually giving them access to food. It's actually giving people access to food. It's not telling them, necessarily what to eat. It's giving them the options to, so that they have healthy food. A third of the children in this community are food insecure. 12% of the population in total is considered food insecure. There are 27 less grocery stores in this community than there should be. based on what the standards say.
22 will open today.
What's that?
22 will open today.
26. You know, the idea for this is, I mean, there are a number of different types of programs that could be funded with this money. Like we saw the folks that came in here that work for True Foods, that you know, we have a growing you know, agricultural, you know, farm, local farm system that's continuing, that's starting to flourish here. You know, the idea is that, you know, it's an economic development driver because you're able to leverage between 3 and 5 times the money that's actually invested, and that's a pretty quick turnaround. The money that the companies that people have spent this money on in the past have had a 90% success rate. You know, thousands of jobs have been created through utilization of this type of program in other states and in other communities. And you're also helping to, I mean, we have a huge issue in this community, not with just food insecurity, but you know, the healthcare outcomes because of what people eat. And if you don't give people access to healthy food, they're never going to eat healthy food, and so people are going to continue. The rates of diabetes in this community are off the charts. The rates of heart disease, you know, all these healthcare problems that we also have to deal with because we have a public hospital, and you know, we live in a community that's you know, very underprivileged as well, and so a lot of times when folks have these healthcare problems, they go to our hospital, and to our public hospital, and the taxpayers end up paying for chronic illness that's caused by one of the root causes is the way people eat and the lack of access to food and the lack of access to healthy food. And so, you know, it's a doubly beneficial because in the long run, the investments that we make are going to better outcomes when it comes to health in the community, and you're going to be stimulating the economy in a very positive way and in a very progressive way, in my opinion. So, and I think that it's definitely worth the investment, and I feel that if we lead the way, you know, Las Cruces is looking at doing it. I know that there's been discussions in the city of El Paso looking at doing it, you know, and if we lead the way, you know, maybe we could also get other communities within the area to also start looking at this and doing something like this. And again, the return on investment with something like this is much more immediate and can be 3 to 5 times. So if we invest $500,000, give it to CDFI, we could possibly see between 1.5 and 2.5 million dollars being spent in this community that wasn't going to be spent here before. I don't know of any other program that you can tell me that has that type of return on its investment so immediately. And you're helping these people to have access to food. The kids have access to food.
Commissioners, what are your thoughts on keeping it as part of the 3 as a standalone? I think if we are going to keep it, it should be part of the 3. I don't think we should tack on.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it being part of the 3 and talking to our economic development department and having them work on that. I mean, I know that some folks think that the 3 is already too much, and I mean, I just think that, you know, this is a program that stands out, that is going to have economic impacts and it's going to have healthcare impacts, which are both things that this county prioritize and that are tasks that we, charges that we have as a county.
Commissioner Leon, Commissioner Bettis?
I believe in that program, but unless the money comes from there, I just can't see where we can afford it coming up from someplace else.
Commissioner Bettis?
I'll go with whatever the court. I mean, it seems in line with having. I mean, I think the economic development department is probably the more. I think there still has to be some metrics as to what the county. If the county ultimately decides to spend that amount of money, there needs to be some sort of metrics to make sure that the county is getting return on investment. So I think the economic development department is more appropriate for that.
But you'd be okay with $500,000 potentially being used for the $3 million? So I think then the $3 million for now stays in. From what I'm hearing, consensus was that can be negotiated later as parameters around the use of the $3 million are established.
Okay.
Is there anything else on this list, commissioners, that you'd like to discuss? I know there are a lot of plans, and we're planning to study the studies on this list. But
they won't be ready for another 24 months.
I don't know if there's any other item that the court would like to consider pulling and either placing for another year or just leaving this all on here for now. It is a $13 million expense. The only other thing that came to mind, Betsy, and I know that we talked about this, and that was working with the Convention and Visitors Bureau and figuring out if we would allocate some money to help with marketing of some of our assets.
We brought that up earlier in the discussions. It didn't seem like there was interest in using the current allocation. That would be able to come from hot funds if the court was interested. And we have set aside money in hot funds. We need a proposal from them. And we do have reserves set aside in hot funds, so if the proposal comes up mid-year, and I understand they're working on a proposal, but when we get that proposal, you all will have funding set aside that you could use to do that.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, that includes the South by Southwest expenditures.
The South by Southwest is in the budget.
See, that's an area that we haven't spoken about. I've asked for results. What has resulted from these expenditures? I think we give them 50,000 or
yes, 75. I think we're up to now, or 50. Yeah, it's 50,000. I think. Let me double check.
I don't. My personal thoughts.
South by Southwest.
Is I'm all for marketing, but I don't think that particular venue does it for us. I think there's a lot of other ways to advertise El Paso than to do that.
Does that come out of hot?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And it may be, Commissioner, that when this proposal comes in, that the court, whether it come in over the next several months or after that, the court consider whether or not there's a value in using that 50,000 and any additional to go toward marketing as opposed to South by Southwest.
And it may be, I've been asking for those totals, and I've been told that somebody else has them, but I've not seen anything.
The totals for, I'm sorry, what?
What does South by Southwest, what does that expenditure result in? Is it a positive? Is it bringing in new business?
Sure. I think what Mr. Crow explained was that your returns are not necessarily immediate, other than, for example, how many tourists see our advertisements while they're there, and how many possible hits there are as a result of seeing that.
And this is, I'm sorry, Betsy, this is really targeting business, not so much tourism, because I asked that same question. And they can't give me any numbers. I've not seen any numbers. It may be the best thing that we can be involved in, but again, over the last couple of years, I've seen nothing. And like the judge said, maybe as we get more into it, we can see some this is taxpayer money that I just don't see a return on.
I mean, we're giving people rides on bikes with a screen thing with pictures is great, it's cool, but is that what's bringing the next big business El Paso, Texas. And I think the whole point of South by Southwest and us being a part of it is, because I was one of the ones who pushed for South by Southwest a couple of years ago. But I agree, I don't know, and the problem with marketing is you don't know. You don't know if it makes sense or not. Everybody knows what Coke is, but Coke still advertises everywhere. Does it help us? Does it not? And the fact that we have, after 2 or 3 years, 2 years, and I know the city did it year before that, nothing numbers-wise that says there's going to be that. I mean, how many years is it going to take before we can get that?
Yeah, and it seems to me that if you're a business person across the country, what I'd be looking for is looking at the Wall Street Journal. Is there an ad in there? Is there an ad in a trade magazine?
No, I mean, we're never, El Paso's never in Texas Monthly. There's never any articles about El Paso in Texas Monthly. Why aren't we in that? Why aren't we doing stuff that actually brings things to us?
Well, and South by Southwest is like a big live trade magazine. I mean, it's a huge. I mean, maybe they're. I think it's hard to quantify any type of advertising that you do. How can you quantify whether, if we put an ad in the Texas Monthly, how do you quantify, that brings something here?
And right now we are doing our own ads in site selection magazines.
Right.
But to track how many leads do we get from that actual.
I mean, we need to be realistic in our expectations as well, because we have to understand that, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to track any type of advertising, unless somebody brings in a coupon to your store, or unless somebody brings something and tells you like, hey, I saw your ad in the Texas Monthly, but
sometimes
it's just about getting your message, or getting your advertising, about getting your message, getting your face or your picture or whatever it is to as many people as you can.
And realistic to you is what?
I mean, I just think it's difficult. We can't expect to have to be able to track something that I mean, can you point to anything in the advertising world that that tells you, okay, this person saw. I mean, there's clicks, there's different things. There's impressions, there's clicks, and those types of things are things that we can track. And the idea is not, in my opinion, when it comes to advertising, is you need to get your message out to as many people as possible, and the more people you have your message out to, then you start seeing people come to whatever, your business or to your community or something like that. But it's very difficult to ask for a number other than those types of things, impressions or contacts. It's just, I mean, I've never seen that in advertising before, where, I mean, you do it because you want the contacts, and you expect that, hopefully, 10% or 20%, whatever, maybe that's something we can look at. But it's not something that you can necessarily measure, unless the person, for example, from a business says, yeah, I saw you at South by Southwest, and I came over here.
Just real quick, I think I agree with you. It's real hard to measure, but you can. I can tell you, during my police department life, we used to advertise a lot of the management and administrative openings through Police Chief Magazine, and they would call, I saw this, I want to apply. And that's so there is certain areas that you can quantify, and there's some that you can't. But this one, I really think that no one's offered any way of telling me this is the result of South by Southwest.
And I think in the conversation that Mr. Crow provided to the court, he mentioned that we should probably get with our economic development team to see if there were any follow-up leads that might have come from South by Southwest. I had the opportunity to attend this last year. I think that if the court is to continue to fund participation, I think that the floor event needs to be changed a little bit. I personally did not in this particular year. Again, it's the first time I've gone. I didn't see a high yield. I mean, I think you're trying to capture people to stop and listen to us and try to give them a pitch about El Paso, but I think there has to be some other way for us to really actively engage people who are wanting to know more about what we offer on the business side of things, if that's what we're aiming to do. And so I do think that if we were to even offer the supplement again to help with South by Southwest, that it does have to be done differently. And I mentioned that to Mr. Crow, that I, on face value for this event, did not initially see the return on the investment. So
I mean, there were some issues, definitely. I think, it was very difficult to, like, when you got to our exhibit, to even understand what it was. There was really no big signage that said, this is El Paso, this is Las Cruces, this is Juarez, whatever. I mean, it was kind of, like
too small.
And so people would just like look at it and see a picture of an enchilada plate and see a picture of a Leco tanks or something, or the missions, and just like, it just
like, what are we promoting?
When you see, for example, I mean, I looked at the Brazil one, which was just a huge. It was bigger than our exhibit. It was in 2 colors, green and yellow, and it just said Brazil all over it.
I do think that you're right, Commissioner. There needs to be some, I think as a court we need to determine what it is that we want to come out of our participation and hold those folks that are receiving the funding accountable for, whether it's our economic development team or the CVB or whomever it may be, that we say this is why we're investing, so we expect these metrics to be met after the investment is made.
I mean, maybe it can be more impressions or more contacts, or
So I know from this year, they did pick up 650 leads that they now, on a regular basis, as their email push goes out for advertising our programs, our economic incentives. That's 650 new contacts that they're sending regular communication to on what's happening here locally, as far as from the economic development standpoint.
And as the Commissioner mentioned, maybe it is having a great yield. We just don't have that information yet. So I don't hear anybody else wanting to discuss any of the other items on this list. I guess we keep it as is. Maybe we should add some items to the list. Everybody seems so amenable.
I do have some community IDs that I'm like.
We've already talked about that.
And Betsy, before we do that, if you can become sort of like the study czar, because it does sound funny, but there's some of them are related, and it just seems like we're overlapping on some.
Yes, sir. I'll definitely work on that. There are some that are similar, and there are some that they may sound similar, but they're very different. But we will work on what we can do to be more efficient in those.
Can you real quick, the jail study, that's a facility study?
It's a double. Well, yes, it's mostly about 2 things about that facility: evaluating the downtown jail design, to see if there are modifications we could make to the building to make the building more efficient. So for example, the annex design is more efficient than the downtown design. There may be modifications that could be made to the downtown building, such as removing some of those center
security.
Not security, but the center.
The control center.
It's not even the control center. There's like storage
blocks
closets.
Our range of view.
And removing some of that to expand the range of view to make our staffing costs more efficient. There's also, right now we know we have 2 empty floors downtown. Repurposing those. Would they be able to be repurposed to move? Sheriff wants a headquarters downtown. Maybe we repurpose one of those floors to be his headquarter offices.
So it's a study of the facility to look at how we can
make it more efficient,
or make more
efficiencies and repurpose.
Okay.
Yes.
So because I had Mr. Hortson from the association was in my office earlier, and he was asking about that, and so I wanted clarification. And then he was mentioning that we did another study in the last couple of years on the jail. We never did. We had one that was in the pipe, but we ended up not doing it because what was that one supposed to be?
That was, we had talked about federal prisoners.
Right.
That was, and then the court modified it a little over probably a year and a half ago or a year ago to get rid of the federal prisoner issue and just say we were going to study the facility for efficiency.
So that's this. So we haven't done any other studies in the last 4 or 5 years on jail.
Well, we've done lots of
They
studies.
have to do with the facility.
Not on the, well, we went out for bid, I want to say it was 2012 or 2013, to do a facility evaluation, and we were trying to combine both looking at operations and the cost of operating and the design. But the bidders, if I recall, I think we got a couple bidders, and neither one of them specialized in both issues. They were more, I think, design study experts. And so the court ended up not awarding.
Not doing it at all.
Not doing it all. But that, I think that was about 5 years ago.
Well, and what was the other study that you had mentioned?
We've done internal studies, several internal studies on the cost of federal prisoners. Then the next question came back that we were, I think, studying that we stopped was, would we have to have two facilities if we did not house federal prisoners?
Right, I remember that.
And that was the one that
doing that, right?
we stopped before it was finished. Correct.
Okay.
But we've done multiple simple cost studies on it, and then more involved, like what's the variable and the invariable cost of housing prisoners.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions on this slide? Okay.
Well, again, I don't know if anyone's willing to reconsider the CPI, because the 2.9 figure that's given to us, I just want the court to be aware that that's just a national index of how much goods have gone up. It's not a reflection on El Paso's cost of living. And I know in the past we've used that, but I guess that's never been brought up. Is that's not reflective of it would be inaccurate to say that the cost of living has gone up 2.9% in El Paso. It has not.
Commissioner, I just want to clarify one thing. When we say the cost of living in El Paso versus the rest of the country, there's two things that we look at. There is a cost of living index for the cost of living in El Paso versus other places. That's not the same as when we talk about the 70%, we've talked about the average wage in El Paso compared to the average per capita income to the state of Texas. And so if you don't change, and I don't mean just internally, this is like El Paso wide, if we don't continue to move our wages comparable to the way wages move across the state, that 70% will become a bigger gap. If the per capita in the rest of Texas is moving faster than the per capita wage here, we will then lag the average state further. I don't know, I can't say, I don't have something in front of me that says the per capita wages in Texas move exactly at CPI rate. I'd have to get that.
I just want to say, I just want the court to have, a good assessment of a good, honest and forthcoming assessment. But, when we talk about county salaries, the average salary here is $55,000, which is far above the $42,000 median home income. And, it's, again, I see the value of a step increase, but, we keep adding these cost of living increases that I don't think are necessarily reflective of what the actual cost of living is here in El Paso, and that's a significant addition to our budget, an ongoing expense. I mean, it's again this 1.5 cost of living is $18 million over 10 years. That certainly affects the future projections, and I think that this year when. Again, every year in the years that I've been here, Commissioner Court has done something in terms of step or COLAs. And this is going to be one of the highest years.
How much
much was the total for the 26 new positions? Was it
2.1, a little over 2.1 million.
And that's factoring in
That would be factoring in positions for the auditor as well. I believe it was a reduced, I'd have to go back, but I need to double check in just a second.
And the only issue I have is I just don't want to go to some arbitrary number. I mean, we're not going to the 2.9% cost of living adjustment. We're going to 1.5. So in my opinion, we're actually doing much less than what the CPI says in the first place. And again, I mean the step is different. I mean, I think that even if you do the 70% calculation, 1.5 is 50% of what the CPI is. So we're not even getting to that 70%. And so I think that 1.5 is fine.
I agree. The argument of the 2.9% being wrong is mute since we didn't do the 2.9. I think the 1.5 and the step is nothing to do with the COLA. The step is what we're talking about. If I've been here 4 years and I'm a clerk and they hire a clerk tomorrow, we don't make the same amount of money. That's the difference. So I think the 2.5 and 1.5 I think is fair with where we are in the current times. And you can't say that prices aren't going up since we've all been talking about the fact that home prices have gone up quite a bit this year. It's since our taxes went up on the appraisals. So I think the 2.5 and 1.5 was decided yesterday, and I think it's fine the way it is.
I mean, maybe in the future, if there's a way to actually not, to take what, to find out what the actual cost of living is, rate increase or decrease in El Paso is, I think we can look at that, but I would rather not do it arbitrarily.
Well, no, and I agree. And I hope going forward we address that, but it is, we just keep the 1.5 is just sort of a figure that we're picking without any sort of indicator of what the cost of living is here in El Paso. And I think and I'm guilty of that in the past too when I've approved COLAs. But in looking at all the COLAs that we've granted in years past, I can't really say that the cost has gone up. The cumulative total of, and I don't have a list here in front of me, but the cumulative total of what we've approved since 2013.
Any other items from yesterday's presentation the court wants to go through?
One thing I'd like to bring up quickly. So we got new revenue estimates this weekend, and auditor certifies revenue, certifies fund balance. One fund that I want to bring back up just for quick discussion and get some consensus from the court is special revenue funds. We have 65 special revenue funds in our budget that are budgeted independently. 38 of them had changes in revenue estimates or fund balance. 3 went down and 35 went up. We put in the county auditor's certification of revenue, so his revenue estimate and his fund balance. So my team's got to go in and modify 38 of those budgets. The modification direction I want is just that, or my recommendation, if the court would consider it, is we still have 85% of the fund balance in there. We've reached out to the other counties. I've gotten 0 responses so far. Most of the counties that we've reached out to have asked, can you send us an email asking for that? So we've sent the email the other day. We've sent a second email this morning, but I've gotten no responses as far as from a policy perspective, what these other counties are doing. The instructions you gave us last year and the modification we made to the financial policy was the 85%. I'm hoping to have, because we sent emails, it's now an open records type of document where I get a response in 10 days. So I'm hoping by the time we adopt the budget and approve the financial policies on Monday the 27th, I've gotten some response back. But from a budgetary perspective, my team needs to go back in and rebalance those budgets. So my intent, and I want to see if the court's okay with that, is to rebalance to, if the revenue is going up or the fund balance is going up, we're just going to rebalance to the 85% of contingency account, unless we're budgeting less than 85% contingency, and it can impact the operational expense where the department had requested an operational expense, but there was not enough revenue to meet their need. I think in most every instance it's going to be rebalancing to contingencies, but there may be a few where I know of a couple funds that they did not have enough revenue to even budget any contingency, so that would be an operational adjustment. I would note those in the budget we propose to you when the change takes place, but does the court have any concerns or comments with us taking that approach? Because we got to rebalance 38 of those funds.
But while you said that 38 of them are north,
35 are going up, 3 are going down.
That's a good problem.
Yeah. So my intent is, for all practical purposes, is if we've met their operating needs, is to rebalance to the contingency at the 85%. So the consensus of the court, that's okay to do. Anything that is on the operating side where they have no contingencies, I'll make sure I note that in the budget we file under the budget highlights, as well as if there's anything significant in the budget letter itself, so the court knows where those moved. That way I can cut my team loose today so they can get busy cranking on that.
Since you're in the spotlight right now, well,
yes, sir.
In the graph that shows our revenues as compared to expenditures, if the East Montana Water Project, are we anticipating that we do the deal in 2019?
We don't know. We're still in negotiations. We'd like for it to be done in 2019.
But the money that was going to be used at 1.5 to pay off the debt was removed.
We have it somewhere else.
We do have it somewhere else.
If the deal worked out this year, that's why we removed it. We have money in the contingency fund, the capital fund that we could use if we needed it.
So would that make a total impact of about 2.8 a year, or?
Well, since that is a enterprise fund, in the future that fund would wash and close out and would no longer be on our books.
Okay.
But we would save on the debt payment. That's about it.
Which gets paid out of the enterprise fund.
Yeah.
So it is a self-standing fund, right?
Yeah.
But our long-term future obligations would no longer exist.
When it comes to the reserves, again, I think whatever's just most transparent, because I know this year was confused, with the 30 million and the other undesignated, from at least from what I gleaned from other counties, that their budgets are much easier to understand because it's very easy to understand the total amount of funds they have moving forward. And I think here when we segregate it into, 30 million emergency reserve, I mean, technically, wouldn't all of it be an emergency reserve if it just moved forward?
You're saying designate 100% of whatever fund balance is into that.
The problem is you can't tell what it really is, and you can't. If you project more than it ends up being at the audit, then we're going to have to reduce the general fund budget. I understand what you're saying is you want to just balance it out, but I don't think anybody can really predict what that true fund balance is going to be. So
would there not be a possibility to do an adjustment right at the beginning of the fiscal year or right after the close of the year?
So let's say operationally we have an $80 million fund balance. If we were to appropriate in 2 line items the amount that's designated to balance the budget and then the amount that is unallocated but for the emergency reserve, we'd ideally be appropriating $80 million in total and setting that up in the budget. So our general fund budget would grow by another, we're designating 38, it would grow by another $41 million. Now, to the extent that the audit came in and the audit said actual fund balance was $79 million, at the point in time,
6 months later.
Right. So at that point in time, 6 months later, then we need to do a budget amendment, reducing the general fund budget based off of the audited fund balance and reducing the reserve.
That's for a reduction. Now, if it's higher,
correct,
then you have to, I think, comply with the statutes. You have to declare.
Yeah.
The only time you can increase the general fund budget or the county budget is if it's not grants or capital projects, since you have to declare like an emergency.
Right.
I don't think the law will provide that we can increase it just to right size the reserve.
So if it's too high, you can bring it down, but if it's too low, it is what it is. We'd have to declare an emergency and budget that emergency fund for an emergency that hasn't occurred yet.
And the other option is, if you overstated that emergency by 5 million, you could just automatically, you could encumber it so that it could never get touched. But I mean, bottom line is, I guess amending the budget is what you want to do to make sure.
But ideally, you'd have on the books a negative fund balance if you over designated.
Yeah.
If we designated 85 and it comes in at 85.
You can't over designate.
Right. We'd have a negative
you're right.
net fund balance in the end. So I would suggest.
So right now we try to err. I don't think it's ultra conservative, but we try to get it as close as possible. But I'm not sure that's what we're really going to gain by right sizing it mid-year. I think we just have the risk of over appropriating funds, which will require a budget reduction, and we don't want to get to that point. And I don't think the intent of the court is to ever really tap into that 30 million unless it's a real emergency. So we should really never have that situation where we literally have to reduce our budget because we're overspending it.
Right. I mean, and again, this is just from my observation. When I read other budget documents, it seems very clear how much their starting balance is, and just from what I've seen, it looks like it's all just appropriated forward. And I think there's a benefit to at least, it would seem to me that would be easier to understand if okay, how much was appropriated forward, and then how much, yeah, sure, there's going to be adjustments and things, but ultimately it's not, those adjustments are going to be minimal to, the overall budget. But I think, right now we're taking out a certain amount from the fund balance. There's a certain left undesignated. There's a certain amount that's taken out to budget or to balance the budget. Those three figures can be confusing. They're essentially the same amount.
In total, they're the same amount.
So I guess we would have to look at the audited numbers of other counties versus what they put in their budget. I think we may be kind of, I don't know if any other county's doing what we're doing. You're saying, or is Bear County doing what we're doing?
I don't. Well, I mean, at least in their budget documents, they have a very clear beginning balance, and then they have in their budget as part of their general fund, they have an unallocated amount. An unallocated fund balance. That's part of their general fund. Then the rest of it is expenditures and whatnot.
Okay.
But,
So
I mean, it's just
maybe-
that's something you all can look at. Again, it's just, but it seems to me that's.
So okay, so you're suggesting maybe we don't have a designated and for emergencies, just have a total allocated, but well, it has to be designated if you balance the budget, right?
Right. I mean, it's just, I guess for
Is it unallocated?
It seems unallocated.
Unallocated
appropriations.
Right.
It's just, I've always found that
Similar to
confusing.
yours.
And because then moving forward, whatever we need to balance the budget will essentially just reduce that amount.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, which is essentially technically done now, but except it's just more convoluted right now when there's just a fund balance, X amount is taken out of the reserves to balance it, where I think it'll just be a much cleaner picture as to how much we shrank that unallocated reserve going into the next budget year. I think it'll just be a much more transparent document, I think, for the court, for the public, because right now it's very hard to determine, what's coming from where and how much did we actually, and that's why I always ask the question, well, how much did we actually dip into our reserves? It's never a clear picture in the court. So the figure I think always gets lost when we tap into funds that weren't really part of our budget.
Well, we'll go ahead and dialogue on it and see what we can do to try to.
I would talk to the audit firm as well, as far as if there's an over designation in audit.
The biggest issue is the timing of when you adopt and when we truly have an idea of what that number really is. If I could tell you today what it's going to be in April of 19, I would. But
yeah, and partly I think that's all the more reason to do it is that so that way whenever the adjustment is made, it's something that we'll keep track of, because I think in years past the fund balance goes up or down and we don't really keep track of it because it's not part of the budget.
Okay.
And I think we do. I mean, since it is such an important, I think the court needs to be very careful not to tap into reserves in the future. I mean, that's why when we need to watch our revenues and expenditures very closely. But I think that may get lost when it's just not part of.
So you're looking for like a variance. Okay, here's what we projected, but here's what it really ended up being. So we were off by how much, and how much did it change?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that adjustment is smaller in the grander things of all that the court I think will gain by knowing how much the total fund balance is moving forward.
I think for comparative purposes, as we prepare our future presentations, is delineating also that designation of reserves, where we have that 85% threshold, we end up going with 85, so that there's a clear line on revenues versus fund balance versus that emergency reserve as well. So you can really see the true change in the operating and personnel comparison on the budgets. So we're not like this year. In future years, those should be in alignment. The only thing that would affect those comparisons in future years would be a significant spike or drop in revenues or the consumption of reserves that were budgeted. But I think we're going to delineate that in the future presentations we make to you, so you can see a real clear understanding: personnel, operating, designated reserve.
And is that possible to do this budget? I'm just one vote, but I mean, if that's, Commissioner, I think that will really help us moving forward, because I don't think any of us would be able to tell you how much we've dipped in the fund balance this year or prior years.
So, and you can now, because you have the projection slide. So if you look at the projection slide, that in and of itself, the over/under on revenues and expenses shows you consumption reserves. So that you now have. And
that's something that I projected for years.
And he's been giving that, gives us that every quarter. Oh, every month.
Every month.
But,
so I think I do it as a graph, but I think what you're asking for is the detail that Wally's showing there to show the trend.
So that table here, this over/under, no consumption, no consumption, no consumption, no consumption this year, consumption. That is dipping into reserves. These are additions to reserves. So maybe looking at it in a different presentation model. These are similar to what he does, just in a different format, a different
if you
layout.
take a look at my monthly, I actually have a red line, but it shows the revenues over or less than expenses, and it shows you the trend over the years, and it's exactly that same that information right there.
But to me, I agree with what Commissioner Pettis is saying. On this, you have to know where to look.
And I think we just had one bit, again, an appropriated but undesignated fund balance moving forward. I think it just helps us in the public to know, so that way when all of our analyses, all the general fund, that's always part of what we look at. I mean, we spend the bulk of our time on the general fund. Mm-hmm. And I think that would give that funding more. It's just, again, I think it's just more transparent, and it just helps the public to understand, as well as the commissioners, that, how much it is we're really dealing with moving forward. And I think all that should just, then we don't get into, this is what's needed for designated, the $30 million is really just arbitrary, right? I mean, I don't know if...
But it makes everybody look like, well, the county's spending a lot more money, especially when you first made that change. Right. And you're not really. You're just planning for an emergency, because by law you have to.
So before we did that 2 years ago, we reached out to rating agencies as well. So we talked to the team at Moody's, talked to Fitch, and got their impression of if there's a clear delineation of what's appropriated versus what's only budgeted for the intent of emergency purpose, but it's designated as opposed to undesignated. And both rating agencies didn't give us any grief over that when we received our latest 2 ratings. It's they factor that in accordingly, so they know it may be appropriated, but for all practical purpose, it's unallocated and it's intended just to be the emergency reserve.
But we can definitely work on how we identify fund balance, making it easier to see and easier to track over time, and easier to understand. I mean, because it's almost like we're getting too much into the semantics of it. It's, it might be what we put on a chart and track in our books, and and behind the scenes it may be an accounting. Yeah. Just like if you look in our books, like telling the difference between the general fund and the special revenue, it's a tab in our book. If those tabs weren't there, it's not like that page 5 is general fund. So we can definitely work on that and bring some
clarity.
Are there chances that we can get everything appropriated, I guess, in the general fund this year?
Why would we do special revenues any different than general fund? If we were going to appropriate it.
But you're saying appropriate, like either at least the 85% like we're doing everywhere else, or 100% of the fund balance.
Well, you do that 100%, then in April we're correcting all the funds. We could be reducing.
For any fund that's below, comes in below the designation. Any fund that comes in over, or under where the fund balance ended up.
It's only
higher,
there, if we over designate,
we would not change those.
We'll be making corrections mid-year before we can do the annual before we can publish the annual report, because we'll have negative deficit fund balances.
Because
Because you over designated the future budget.
yeah, all it takes is something in a fund where he's estimating $20,000 in expense, and the department processes year-end expenses that end up being 30, and then that fund is now $10,000 short. I mean, it's an adjustment that can be made in the future period, but you know, it's just we may be tweaking the budget.
I'm not saying we can't do it.
It can be done.
What I'm saying is that it's gonna. We'll have to see how our auditors.
I just so I mean, I'm just putting this in like easy terms for myself to understand. So if we budgeted fund balance on general fund to be $79 million, and we allocated all 79 million, but then one of our major general fund projects doesn't go through. It doesn't, or it comes in under budget by $50,000. What we're saying is we'll have $79 million designated. The other 50,000 won't be designated.
You'll actually have a reserve that now exceeds your designation. So
in this instance, yeah,
an undesignated of 50 at the bottom,
right.
Where your idea is have it go to 0. So it's all.
And we won't know that bill
reserved
came in at less than $50,000. The PO's out right now today, but it won't be finalized and closed out until after we finalize the budget.
Right.
And so that's why there's that little gap period, and that's what we have to figure out how to clean up.
But your small undesignated will probably be immaterial because.
But the ones that are the other way, but the opposite of that is we put something out there. It was supposed to be 200,000, and it comes in at 204,000, and we had designated 79 million. Now we're only going to have 78,996,000 to actually designate.
Yeah.
So we'll have to be adjusting those final designations, is what we're saying.
Via an amendment. I mean, because his certification of fund balance, the budget statute's real clear. It is.
May not exceed.
Yeah, it's cash on hand, it's estimated revenues, and it's estimated fund balances. So it's clearly based off of those estimates, adjusting downward statutorily, no prohibitions, adjusting up for something that was previously certified, you need to declare an emergency. But in those instances, you're going to have small amounts undesignated.
So it sounds like
if the court wants to go there,
a prohibition for us budgeting a fund balance that exceeds what I'm projecting.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
But I think that's what we're talking about.
I
You're
can't
asking
budget
me
more than you project.
To project, say, 83 million when I think it really is going to be hitting 81.5. And it may end up being 84. It's like I say, I don't have a crystal ball, so I think, but that's the way it works. But I think we're getting real close to what you're trying to.
I mean, I guess just my point is that for the most part, the 80. I mean, for our purposes, the 80 million is going to be appropriated.
Yeah.
I think that the tweaks here and there.
You're going to have 90 something, high 90%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it helps us to keep track of the bulk of the 80 million.
Yeah.
So it can be done. Would the court like to go at the 100% level? I mean, because if it does, I need that consensus today, because I'm now going to be changing every fund. Every fund will go up.
I mean, so commissioners, essentially, so it's just what that'll do for us is just that the fund balance will essentially be part of the general fund, and so whenever we present the public, like what is the funding of the county comprised of? Whenever the public looks at our budget documents, they can see from our general fund document how much it is we're spending, on the general fund, which includes personnel, all these other items. But a big slice of the pie will then be, well, this is an unallocated reserve that's essentially the county's carry forward balance. And right now that funding, I don't want to say is away from public view, but you really have to hunt for it to see how much the county had to start with, from last year, or how much it is they carried forward to balance the budget. And so right now we have essentially three balances, right? There's the fund balance, and from it we take X every year, depending on the budget, we'll take X amount to balance the budget. So the only part that we see in the general fund is the part that we need to balance the budget. But the rest of it sort of stays away from the general fund and mostly outside of view. This way, all the fund balances, for the general fund, everything will be there, and there won't be this separation. But I think right now it gets at least for me, it gets very confusing as to how much was dipped in to balance the budget. Things like that. This way, everything's just carried forward for our benefit, for the public's benefit. I think it's just a much cleaner document. And from my observation, when I look at other budget documents, it's much easier to glean what a county is starting for, what their fund balances are, what their reserves are, because they just move all that forward.
Well, wasn't it really recently that we carved out the $30 million?
2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the second year.
I think we did that to try to make it more transparent 2 years ago, and now you're wanting to do it because I think that was.
Well, it's not doing it. It's doing it 100%.
30%, 30 million isn't even 50%.
Yeah. That 30 becomes 48 this year. Yeah.
Well, almost the other half is designated to balance the budget. Yeah.
Oh,
34.
But 48 is unallocated. It's appropriated, but unallocated to a specific line item.
But I think that's where that's where I think the confusion comes in. Is just that I think it'd be much easier to refer to all these funds as just.
What you're saying is to allocate them to different line items, where I don't think that's right.
No. It would be so each fund would have its own, because you have to have each fund. The general fund would have unallocated budget reserves. Road and Bridge would have unallocated budget reserves. Hot Fund, unallocated budget reserves. But you would be able to see them in it would be designated but unallocated.
Because it's
doesn't that make it more confusing though if you're putting it under each department or then you're
having
to say, okay, so general fund has this much and then this one has this much,
so
then
what
add them back up.
What I would do is
I'm always asking, how much money do we have left in the hot fund? How much money do we have left in the hot fund? Now we would see a line item. I could go look at how much money is left in the hot fund. You'd see a line item that would show undesignated fund balance.
It's essentially just a carry forward. Which is kind of what we do now, but it's a lot of it's, again, you have to really dig for these things.
And I just my fear is someone looks at that and says we have $80 million to spend or $30 million to spend, not we have $30 million reserves, $40 million.
And that's I hear where you're coming from, but right now I guess it's just that keeping those in the reserve sort of keeps that money. I mean, it is there to spend technically, and we're not designating it to spend by moving it forward. We're just kind of illuminating how much is there. I'm not saying that we spend that money at all. I still think that there needs to be some sort of.
Well, we can put it in our financial policies.
But there's nothing to stop the court from designating a certain amount, anyways, from the fund balance.
No, I don't. I see both sides of the issue. I don't. My fear is the last day of budget. I don't think it's the day we make the decision to completely change the budgets right now. Is my only issue with it, and I understand what you're saying, but I like it saying there's a $30 million reserve fund that is there for emergencies and emergencies only. So when you start telling people there's money available, they find out.
But you have the 30 million plus the
39 million or 40.
So that emergency reserve is in addition to the fund balance that's not in the general fund, and that's where I'm saying it's just really confusing. Because technically, in addition to that 30 million, if we ever had to declare an emergency, there would be additional fund balance. Right? There's how much is it? 40 in addition to 30, or I can't say. In fact, I can't even tell you. Is
last year we designated 34 out of the estimated 80. Last year's estimate was 81. Then we went into hearings with 81 million last year. So the difference between those, the 47 million, was undesignated. We designated 30 million for emergency, so 17 was not even designated. That went into undesignated reserve.
I'm not sure we're saying the same thing yet. Because if you're saying only 17, and we know that there was a fund balance of 82.63, and we've only designated 30 million of it, I think what Commissioner Pettis is saying is the entire 42.63 difference would be appropriated fund balance.
But I mean, technically, wouldn't it be 50 million? If I'm and that's where we have all these different running totals. But I think if we just give ourselves just one number, again, I'm not saying spend this at all, but move this forward so we can all know what this number that we're working with. And then keep it, all designate, the 30 million plus the unassigned keep it as an emergency designation, which is technically what it is now, but just move it forward. So we have a clearer picture, every time we look at the budget throughout the year.
So right now it's at the 30 million, and then unassigned that's an additional 41 on top of that 30 million?
See, and that's what I don't understand, because you have the 41 plus the 30 is only set at 71.
Right.
And this is what I'm saying, is just that there's so many totals out there that it's just...
It's because we're using a portion of it to go up into the FY19 expense fund.
That $68 million designation is the difference between
the
revenue estimate and the budget.
So we have 38 million more.
Exactly.
So that will be our fund balance projected for FY19.
This is the fund balance to balance the
Right.
budget. Everything else would be allocated, would be budgeted as well. So I would be budgeting a fund balance of 80 and a quarter. And this is 80 and a quarter off of the estimates I had last week. His fund balance that he emailed me this weekend is $82.577 million. I would be budgeting $82.577 million. But the amount required to balance the budget will be the total of the difference between revenues and total appropriations.
I think it'd be a much clearer picture for the court. And I think the court would have to see, I think once that's moved forward, I think the court would see the benefits of knowing how much is carried forward. I think for a budget, it just makes it a much simpler process.
So on this one, with the prior fund balance of $80.25 million, our budget would be $356 million off of this model right here on the screen.
Instead of 345.
Right.
So it'd be 11 million.
But I would have a line item designated, I would have a line item appropriated, unappropriated fund balance. Unallocated. It's not allocated to a department specific expense.
Right. It's just
if
a
you wanted
fund
to
balance.
restrict the usage, then in the financial policies, I designate that the appropriated unallocated fund balance is to be used for the same purpose before it as for a declared emergency. May only be tapped into and utilized via policy. Now that's as good as the policy.
It'd be the policy the court adopts.
Correct.
And I think the other benefit too is that so when people talk about our general fund, what's the size of the general fund, this is a more accurate representation of how much funding the county essentially manages.
I think it's a wise, and I do think you'll then see, in your total general, looking at your overall general fund, you'll see that fund balance. I know a long time ago, back when you get printouts, you'd see the fund balance at the beginning. That was the first thing we'd see. Fund balance is X amount. Then here's your revenues. Here's your expenses. It's more logical from an accounting perspective in my mind, the way you see the data. You know how much money is in the fund balance for each fund. Because there are times when you want to do a project, and I keep going back to hot funds. I did not realize we had the money to do Casa Ronquillo a few years ago because it's in fund balance. And it's I needed to really dive in and see that fund balance to make sure we had the money to do Casa Ronquillo. And that's a small, simple fund. It's even more telling with bigger, more complex funds.
Well, you say it was in the fund balance. You mean it was in a budget somewhere?
No.
It was not budgeted.
It
was
was
unallocated.
It's available
I didn't even
in
know
the
the money was
fund,
there.
but not appropriated.
Yeah.
So
But it wasn't identified in the fund balance for Casa Ronquillo. It was available, yes.
So
right, but I didn't know it was available.
Here's the proof of what that number would be. Just I want to not try to belabor it, but I want the court to grasp what this is. So I took our revised budget as of last night, the $345 million, and I'm backing the $30 million out that we're designating for emergency. So the true budget next year, operationally, is $315.1 million. This $356 million is all fund balance plus all revenue estimates. That's what you have available to appropriate. So the difference between what's available to appropriate and what we need to balance the budget this 41.7, the 30 would grow to $41.76 million. That would be appropriated, unallocated reserves. And in your financial policy, we can declare how those funds in how they could be
So there'd be
spent.
no more money in general fund anywhere else.
No, ma'am.
That would be the
That's-
total.
That is everything. But I would suggest, if we're doing it with the general fund, even though it's a lot of work, why wouldn't we do that in any fund?
So it's
I'll use the
100%.
hot tax, I'll use the hot tax as your example.
Right.
You would always know for the future in the hot tax what you have available in future years for consideration for anything you wanted to do. Purchase a historical facility, improve it, etc. The only thing potentially is, again,
100% is, I'm not sure you're ever gonna hit it, maybe 99, 98%.
Oh, I know, yeah, it is.
Maybe more prudent, you won't have to do all that additional work because it'll be a residual, it's just a balancing factor. But, sure.
I mean, if it makes things easier to understand, I mean, I will say that one of the points that Commissioner Bett has raised, and I'm sure that the court will each share with Betsy kind of what their thoughts on maybe improving the budget process moving forward, but if this does make it easier to understand for anyone that were to pick up the budget, I'm okay with it. It's not gonna have any effect on this year's budget whatsoever and all the work that we've done.
On this year's, the only thing it would do is every single fund's gonna change.
They're gonna change, but they're gonna
They're all
change
gonna
to
go up.
show now they'll have a fund balance tracking. And it would not be, we cannot put it down, it wouldn't be in personnel, it shouldn't be in operating, it'd be its own
It'd be
category.
its own category.
Gabby's face looks so
I know,
sad.
No, it's because on our side,
It's long.
I literally have to rebalance every single fund. It's about 80, more than 80 funds. It's 100 funds I've got to rebalance. So the budget, every budget's going to change. Can it be done? Yes, it's doable. Is it a clear indication as to what you have in future years to spend? It is everything. The only thing is, come March, if a revenue falls short of projection of estimate, or if spend is higher than we estimate they're going to spend, we would be adjusting those downward,
But not upward.
not upward. Because upward, you increase your budget for newly certifiable revenues and things that were unforeseen.
And we can study how others do it in the meantime,
Okay.
between now and when that year-end close in April or.
I mean, is that gonna make a significant difference between now and the passing of the budget on the 27th? Are we gonna be able to do that by then?
The number's going to go up.
Yes.
Can it be done? Yes.
I was saying if it's not, then it's something we can do for the next budget, or even do it with this budget once it's been approved. But, I mean, this is a big change on it.
That's my fear, and that's my only issue. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. I'm saying the fact that we're deciding the last day of budget to completely redo how we're doing it.
And the only reason I brought it up is the 85% we used for special revenue is if were we going to hold at 85? Because if we're holding 85, I've got new revenue estimates that I received this weekend, and I've got to rebalance those new revenue
But
estimates.
since we're going to rebalance those new revenue estimates, we could change the 85% to our projected 100%.
Yeah, but all I can say is that
We need to create a logic.
I don't think we ought to have discussion later on as to why I didn't hit my target. I'm telling you right now, these numbers are, I
They're moving.
don't have a crystal ball. These numbers are not gonna be right. You're gonna end up, you can't increase your budget, but likely you'll be decreasing your budget if the expenditures come in higher than we've projected. And based on input from budget and policy, yesterday I got an additional 1.4 million or 2 days ago to reduce, and that was after I gave you my fund balance projection, okay? So that's $1.5 million right there. And I'm sure there's some other stuff. So I'm saying 100% is, to me, I think it's unrealistic. Maybe a 98%. You need to have because we have reserves for inventory, change funds, that is part of the fund balance reserve that need to be taken out of consideration because they're not available for anything else because they're reserved for
And it's also reserved for encumbrances. And
Yeah.
departments still
and
have
that's a couple
$2
million
weeks.
there.
They still have 2 weeks.
$3-4 million
to issue requisitions and POs. So we will have adopted the budget, and the expiration for those encumbrances is 4 days after we adopt the budget. So, but he's going off of historical.
And so I
And
would
it
have
can be
to
done.
wait till right before the CAFR, because since things are changing every single month up to the time we do the annual report, I'll have to be coming to the commissioners to reduce the budget, if we keep getting more expenses. So yes, it's gonna cause some complication in the process. Either that or I'd wait till the very last minute and we do a swoop of reducing it by 5 million, whatever it ends up being. So I'm thinking I understand your intent, but I don't think it's 100% is a realistic.
And then
projection.
between now and April, so if we did what we estimate at 100% now, and then when it actually closes, you all do the year-end close, and you are making adjustments. And between now and then, we can also research if there's some method that other counties use that do this process to try to either, like how they designate the portion that was not captured due to the changes.
Yeah, and then I guess moving forward, then I guess, if, the law says you can't go over what I project, then my projection, I'll need to factor in some of these things. I shouldn't be, giving you 83 if we're gonna end up having a portion of that for encumbrances and the other things. I need to further reduce my projection then, moving forward, to account for those, to prevent us from coming back to have to make adjustments is what I'm suggesting. But at this point, I've given you just bottom line where the fund balance will be, not considering encumbrances and other reductions. Well, I'll take encumbrances back. I think I did factor those as part of my expense projection. But the purchasing will be doing additional PLs all the way through October for the year end. So, well, September 30 at least.
So, Gabby brings up a good question that I would like to get the board's discussion on. So, if we did it all unallocated, appropriated, unallocated,
Yes.
and the policy states it can only be used for an emergency purpose, it's no longer a contingency without the declaration of an emergency. Right now, we have 85% in contingency.
Okay, you're not gonna write that in the policy. The policy they're gonna wanna adopt is not gonna say only emergency.
But
That's what it currently says, so I think.
Yeah, and that's the 30
But that's for
million.
the 30.
Okay, so
30 million.
if it's not only emergency,
The 30 million, and the other one would be just unallocated until they decide.
so is the intent to leave it contingency as a
And that's my question,
because if it's no longer only emergency and it's all appropriated for consideration for allocation,
they can be used by anyone.
it can be used for anything, and there's no longer
the 30 the 30 is
You write the
restricted.
policy in a way that there's things outside, that the majority would be for an emergency use. However, and we need to go research what other policies, it's done other places, and there's gotta be ways, we look into how it's written.
Right, I'm just, for my purpose, for balancing the budgets. And that rebalancing, because we've got to create object codes and get those keyed in if we change it.
If
So
we
that's,
wanted to reflect under operating, we would have to create a whole new object code. And that's kind of where
the
question comes from. Yeah. If we're gonna put everything in the new object code, or if we're gonna do some contingencies for use, and the other object code will be the difference, just so that we can always see what's there. So that's
Commissioner
one way.
Well, because we're 95% done with our budget this year, and this is, I imagine this is a lot of pressure for you to try to change everything within this budget season. Would it be more realistic to say, okay, as we go into next year's budget, that we have more time to think this out and not do it in such a rush?
I mean, we can develop a policy, object codes, and then go into the fiscal year with that as our preparation. I mean, because it would be pre-prepared. I mean, as it stands right now, we change it. I mean, it's doable. It's a lot to do. But certainly, it can be done, and it does add value to the understanding and interpretation for both you, the court, but also the consumer.
Gabby didn't like it one bit.
I'm looking for clarity,
Okay.
so that was looking for.
Well, I'm just.
My issue is, and I understand I'm not against it, but again, I think there's too many questions right now for us to say, let's do it the day before or on the last day of it. Because I agree, if we've now swept everything there, we no longer have a magical $30 million don't touch unless it's an emergency account. And that means everything. What that means if there's any other project that comes up, from what I understand, it's either open or it's closed, and we've got to decide which it is. So that's my fear. Is I think there's still too many questions for us to flip a switch and completely change things. I don't mind the idea of it. I think there's too many things we got to iron out before we switch it right now.
I'm fine either way. I just worry that it may put an added burden right now. I don't know, because I don't know what that work would entail between now and whenever we'd want to have this done, and how accurate it would be if we can only go to 98% as opposed to the 100. So then is it still not painting the full picture?
I mean, it's going to paint a fuller picture. Whatever percent we pick, even at 98, some of those funds could still come under, and we may need to reduce and adjust the budget.
To me, the 39 is arbitrary. What if we were to say, then up most of it to, 70 right now, that'll still leave you some unassigned.
Right.
I mean, would that make it easier I think that would account for the majority of the funds then. I don't know. It just seems to me that again, keeping the 30 million itself is just sort of an arbitrary number.
Well, you want to do it similar to what we did with the special revenue, budget them all at 85%. All at 85.
Why 85?
And is it any less? I mean, is it any less work?
Well,
Same policy,
So,
15%.
But why? What was 85? What was the value of it?
Leaving some amount undesignated for a future period, and to allow for those variances.
Yeah, to put the unknown at fiscal year end as to where they were really going to settle. Because we have some accounts in special revenue that are real close to, they barely break even. And you budget 100% and the revenue didn't come in. Oh boy, and then now we need to address, you all want to pick up a negative because they spent more than they had in reserves because we projected amount. I mean, we'll have to, like I said, there's going to be so much reconciliation that we're going to have to do to try to make sure we don't overspend. And if we do, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for it.
Well, to the extent that you put the difference of that 85% in a contingency, you can't transfer that money out of contingency without a budget amendment through the court. And at that point in time, if they ever wanted to spend it, we have the ability to say no.
And if the audit comes in different, then we'll be coming back to the reduction to the appropriations and the designation, including the general fund.
So does 85% make it easier for you all?
Yes. It's manageable. 85 is manageable. Even if you went to 90?
I think even 90 is manageable.
It's fine.
I think that gets at least most of the funds captured than we currently do.
And if we did it that way, like I said, this is if we did it that way and set it at 85 or 90, come April of next year, we're going to know how close it came, and say, look, at maybe we should be move it up or down, back down to 85, or back up to 95. We'll know the picture at the end.
But that still removes the emergency 30 million from being the emergency 30 million. Or does it leave it untouched?
I understand we have two.
It would be part of this fund balance.
It's the same fund.
Right. And
It's
there would
essentially
be
So
some
that
logic
30
to why.
that 30 would grow to close to 40.
But is it going to be called emergencies or is it going to be designated but unassigned?
Right.
It would be allocated fund, or
Good thing it's one.
allocated fund balance.
Well, for
Allocated
financial
reserves?
reporting purposes, we have to have it as designated. And right now it's designated for emergencies. Now it's designated but unassigned.
Designated fund balance, or allocated fund balance?
I don't. Whatever.
It's not, so I'm saying we're not going to have
appropriated fund
30 for
balance.
emergencies. Now it's going to be 45 or whatever it ends up being.
I mean, but there's still the same restrictions on it, isn't there?
Well, that's the question.
The 30 million has to come back to the court for a declaration
But I
of
think
an
the court,
emergency
I think that
based on the current policy.
That's our
I
policy.
think the desire be a policy is the policy desire to still restrict that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
For
if we
emergency
had,
only?
Yes.
Okay.
if we have 15, which is designated but unassigned, that just requires action of the commissioner's court to appropriate that, like you do a capital project, you distribute it to those line items that you want to spend on.
Yeah. I mean, can we do the 90% with the same designation for the court? I mean, my intent is not to spend this money. It's just to, again, capture it so it's...
Capture a majority of what our
Yes.
year
So we're just creating a new category now that'll be the gap between the 30 and what ends up being.
No, the
No,
entire
it will
30 will
be
move
the-
over there.
The 30 moves to that
Okay,
gap.
so there's no restriction anymore.
No, there is a restriction.
No.
It's appropriated, unallocated. It can only be used for an emergency purpose as a
So the whole 41 would be
90% of the 41.
90% of the
37
41.
Which is what it is now.
Okay.
30 goes up to
I can
37.
see it's already making it bigger.
It's just going
Well,
to
with
be.
the goal is hopefully with 100% in the future, but I think it's certainly a step in the right direction of capturing. I just don't like those funds not accounted for in fund balance. But
But we don't have the
but here's the thing: to tap into that 40, we can certainly tap into that 41 million again. But it just that really requires an emergency
Hold on,
designation.
guys, we've got like 4 people talking. Can we all just one at a time, because this is important. If we do the 90%, but keep the 30 million, but see, that's the thing, we can't keep it at a loss 30.
It's
Why can't we
90%
just-
30
of
become-
fund balance is not $30 million.
But why can't we just say the 30 million? Why can't we just keep it at 30
You
million?
can, but then you're not gonna have the 90% allocated.
It's because 30 million is an arbitrary number. So
It's-
that's what I'm
it's a
saying. It's just
number
that.
we
So
pick.
just fold that 30 million back into the fund balance and get 90% of that.
So my calculation when I'm balancing the budget, this is what the number becomes. 37 and a half. I told you 37 is 37 and a half. So that 30 becomes 37 and a half. That 30, that number changes every year
Okay.
based off of
Same restrictions.
same restrictions,
Right.
different title.
Right.
The title we would give it. Now the
there's
revenue side of it.
Real quick, there's a logic to that. So that number, that 41, has fluctuated from year to year to year, but we've stayed consistent at 30 since we've been doing it. Now there's some logic to why the amount is what the amount is. 90% of whatever that is projected fund balance will be an appropriated emergency fund reserve.
That's helpful to know. I feel like that was lost in translation here, and I think Ed, you feel a little better now with that. So 90%
Right now it's
Of the projected
projected.
fund balance
Yeah.
will now be an appropriated emergency reserve
10%, not
90%.
So there won't be.
10% is appropriated as emergency, not 90%.
90%.
Will there be, okay, so it's all gonna be in the budget at this point, so there's not gonna be a designation to balance the budget, it's just gonna be 90% is in the budget.
After, this is the projected fund balance after
Because-
you've balanced.
Okay, because what I'm saying is you have to designate a portion to balance your budget. The
Right.
unallocated
Right.
is your difference. Yeah.
So I would propose that we maintain the designated for fund balance object code. That is to balance the operating budget, the
Yes.
315 million. The difference would be in an object code similar to what we had before, which was designated emergencies.
And we can change the title if we need to.
The
Whatever you
title,
all
yeah.
decide.
Would be appropriated
Right,
fund
and
reserve.
policy will drive that to only be used for an emergency purpose. That would be the $37 million number.
Okay.
So the only thing, are we gonna do the same practice with special revenues? It will not be in a contingency, it will be in an unallocated reserve only for an emergency. Because now, for an emergency, I think, and Lee, I need you to listen closely to this one, because I think you need to weigh in on the ability to use those funds mid-year. So let's use HOT as the example. If I budget 90% of the reserves in HOT, and it via policy can only be used for an emergency, how do you
So you
declare?
designate, just like he's talking about for fund balance, we have some portion designated
Contingency?
for contingency,
The
and we have
balance.
some balance for fund reserve.
But in your policy, not in objects.
Yeah.
What?
But in the policy, not in objects.
No, in objects.
So you just need
Right
a-
now, we have an
So-
object.
so you have to go-
This is
How
an
much the
accounting discussion that we
contingency
can have and clarify, but, and to make it clear, we're talking procedure. Right now, we're budgeting some contingency. we would continue to budget some contingency. But this would be fund reserve. This is an accounting procedural issue, not a policy decision, as far as what we're talking about in the background.
Well,
Okay, but I need that clarification.
Right.
I do. From
And we're saying that
budget prep.
when we go through and we designate contingencies for each fund, that's one thing. But a fund reserve, a balance, is another thing. That's the policy decision for the 90%.
So is the contingency gonna be the other 10% that's left over?
No.
That's
No.
It's part of the 90.
It's part of the budget. So like, for example, I'm gonna just, again, be simple to make it where I can understand it and explain it. Just for even numbers, say Hot Fund had $1 million. We're gonna put into, total was $1 million. The fund balance was projected after we do everything in budget, which, as we do everything in budget, we also create one line item that says, you know what, we're gonna set up aside 100,000 of that for contingencies that come up. So, and then the budget is another $500,000. So that leaves $400,000 fund balance. So that $400,000, we're gonna take 90% of, $360,000, and put in this reserve emergency fund. But the $100,000 contingency is up as part of the budget.
Yes.
So we
but-
may need to go back through the special reserve contingencies and see how much is true contingency and how much is fund balance.
But there still needs to be
But
that line
what
item.
if there's a project that you wanna use that for?
That's what I'm saying, is I need-
Well, right now-
$360,000 on it, it's not an emergency, it's like, you wanna buy a property with it.
So that's what I'm saying,
So
I
how do we
use hot
unencumber
funds
it?
as the example.
Right now,
I need to have a contingency and an unallocated reserve. I need to have both. So the
So right
total-
now, Commissioner, though, right now, if it's not allocated, you could not touch it right now.
Unless you did a
Declared an
budget
emergency. No, it's an emergency, only an emergency if it's not allocated.
And one other way to think of it is that the more we appropriate, it's more subject to Commissioners Court policy than it is to, right? Is that another, maybe I'm accurate? Because essentially the emergency that we still have to declare an emergency, but that's via policy. But the court still has to take a vote. Not necessarily by, isn't the other emergency declaration by statute?
So if it's not budgeted and you want to spend it and it's in fund balance, that's by statute.
You have to follow all the budget law, have a public hearing.
Right, but by moving 90% of it,
You don't have
isn't
to do that. You can
Right.
just have a Commissioners Court meeting to make the decision.
Yes.
Make your own declaration.
Correct.
And you're not violating any state law.
Right.
But you don't have to have a public hearing.
Let me just, can I clarify one more thing?
Okay.
Based on your example, Betsy, I estimate revenues, and you have a budget. They estimate revenues of 400,000. Your budget is 700,000 for operations. That difference usually has to be identified because it's a
And
gap.
it's gonna come from fund balance.
But are we gonna have that line item in there, or is that just gonna be part of the overall 90%? Because right now, we
No, no,
designate
no.
the gap between revenues and.
You would
actual-
designate it.
Okay, so that'll
And then the
be part of the
remaining
90
balance,
that nets out.
and it would net out, now you're gonna have a lower amount to designate 90 from.
Okay. That's the part I didn't understand, because when you said fund balance 90%, no, it's fund balance minus the amount to balance the operating budget, and 90% of the residual.
Right, because that's not your projected reserve if you're gonna use a portion of it. It's your projected reserve after you've used what's necessary to balance.
Okay. So this is a policy question I'm gonna ask, not a, because I've gotta balance the budget, not a accounting. So I'll use hot funds. And this scenario applies to any special revenue fund, so hot being one of the special revenue funds. I've got $2 million, and I'm throwing this number out, this is arbitrary, but a $2 million fund balance. I am going to budget 90% of that. So I'm gonna budget 1.8 million in
Appropriated fund reserve.
but appropriated. But your policy is you can only spend it if you find an emergency. So to buy a building,
It's not an
it's not an
emergency.
emergency. So what I'm saying is, on special revenues, I would recommend, as opposed to having unallocated, I put it in, the 90% is in contingency. That allows you to spend.
How do you?
See, that's what I said, we need to go back,
See, I don't
we need
think
to go
hot
to
funds
special revenues,
requires
we need to
an
come back with a
emergency.
recommended contingency.
Yeah.
Right.
We need to bring that back to the court.
But I've got 38 special revenues that changed. I've got to rebalance those. And filing the budget next week. So
I
coming
don't
back to
believe
the court.
special revenue should be emergency requirements. I think general fund is emergency requirement change. Special, I don't like, because there's not gonna be too many hot funds emergencies that we're ever gonna be able to touch.
Right, so for this purpose, I would argue special revenues should be, the 90% should be the contingency number.
Okay,
At
for
the
this
stage,
year?
at the stage where we're at now because of this year.
For
I
this year, we can leave them where the 85 is now. If the court would allow us to leave special revenues as contingencies at 90%, and then we'll work through policy for
Correct.
next year's budget
On
to
safe.
have a contingency fund and an appropriated fund reserve
Correct.
fund. So we'll split that up for next year, but for this year, if we think it's appropriate, it might be the majority's contingency. But for general fund, we will come back with a 90% emergency reserve
Yeah.
fund.
Because the general fund
Would that-
is the easier fund to do because it's one fund. They have to create one additional object code. If we do it all funds, it's a lot.
Okay, would that work for the court?
I've lost me a little bit. So
So
long as
90
the majority of funds are appropriated, it helps give us a clear picture, and then we move forward. I mean, the next year we kind of look at where we are and see if we can do the rest.
Yes,
If that's
Yes,
even
sir.
feasible, I think
Yes,
that's
sir.
The split contingency and unallocated, yes.
Yes, sir.
They'll all be 90.
Is that okay?
I think, honestly, I think we're all lost, and to make a decision of this magnitude, although it sounds like it would be good, especially looking at the charts, I don't think anyone on the court right now has a firm understanding, including Commissioner Pettis, who probably have the best understanding of this to begin with.
I think I understand what
So just
Think about it.
So, I mean, if you guys are fine with what's being proposed now and then continue making additional changes for this next budget, that's fine, but we can also work on making these changes in their entirety for the next budget and let the court have a conversation about that heading into the next budget. But,
Well,
I will.
one day,
So-
one day, give me one day.
let's not.
We'll also cover this again tomorrow in a simplified way.
With stick figures and charts.
No, I'll put together a full slide presentation on I think the best approach in the way.
that would be ideal, just to give it more thought as opposed to going back and forth.
All right.
And I appreciate everyone's patience. I do think it's a very important discussion about how we manage our funds, and so I know it's convoluted and confusing, but it is important. So I appreciate everyone's patience.
So it seems like we've got 4 pending items that we'll be discussing tomorrow. The 26 positions and bringing that potentially down to 1.5 million. The cost of raising the G5, 6, and G7s to $12 an hour. The EHM proposal, and then the current budget change that we just discussed. So that will come before the court tomorrow. I don't know that we have anything else to discuss today.
No, sir.
But we've got the UMC budget hearing at 2:30 this afternoon. And if the court wishes, we can always come back and have even more fun budget discussions this afternoon after the UMC hearing. But if not, then we're scheduled to come back tomorrow for the rest of our decision making.
Judge, if you want to come back after the UMC hearing, you'll have to recess instead of adjourn.
Okay.
Does anyone feel the need to come back this afternoon?
We will not be ready this afternoon.
Seeing none, motion to adjourn.
So before we do that, any other questions on the budget? No? Okay.
Yeah, there's a seat.
We have a motion in a second.
You just adjourn when you're ready.
I was just kind of trying to get
the ball rolling. At 12, I believe.
12? The Civic Center?
No, I believe it's at, oh yes, yes.
So, is that the Civic Center?
Yeah.
Oh, and I have your tickets. I'll bring them right back.
Usually stroll.
Yes, I'll bring them right back over.
Okay, sure.
Well, we're not.
No, I can't do it to you.
You don't have to go, sir.
That's the question. If you're adjourning, you just adjourn.
Okay.
I wanted to come back this afternoon.
We're behind.
No, we're not. I think we're behind. We're okay. If you're okay, then this concludes today's meeting at 11:04 a.m.